Imagine a city bigger than London, bigger than Paris, with earthen pyramids as large as those in Egypt, a metropolis of 40,000 people with gigantic squares, an astronomical observatory, and a ball game that attracted crowds. Now imagine that this city is not in Egypt. It is not in Mesopotamia. It is in the United States, in Illinois, before Chicago, before New York, before any city you know. There was Cahokia. And then, nothing. Deforestation, flooding, collapse. By 1400, the city was empty. When the Europeans arrived, they found only mounds of earth covered in grass. They wondered, who built this? And the answer is simple. The Americans forgot that they were once indigenous. Cahokia is not an original indigenous name. It is a name given by the French in the 17th century, based on a tribe that lived in the region at that time. But the city's builders were different. The Mississippian culture, a civilization that flourished in the Mississippi Valley between 800 and 1600 AD. They built cities. They cultivated corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters that sustained their economy. They had an animistic religion, where the sun, the mountains, and the rivers were alive and sacred. At its peak, around 1100, Cahokia had a population of 15,000 to 20,000 people. If we consider the suburbs, Greater Cahokia may have reached 40,000 or even 50,000 inhabitants. It was the largest population concentration north of Mexico until the 18th century. The city occupied more than 5 square miles. 120 mounds of earth were scattered throughout the valley. The largest of them was Monk's Mound, the tomb of the monks, 100 meters high, more than 5 hectares at its base. The third largest pyramid in the Americas, behind only those in Mexico and Peru. Built with 25 million cubic feet of earth, transported in baskets, by hand, because the builders had no pack animals. They had no wheels. They carried each handful of earth. At the top of Monk's Mound, there was a temple, a structure of wood and clay over 30 meters high. It was the religious and political center of the city. The ruler of Cahokia was called Brother of the Sun. He and his priests controlled the spiritual and material life of the entire region. They believed that spiritual power was concentrated in certain places, and Cahokia was the most powerful of all. Cahokia was not just a religious center, it was a vibrant city. Merchants traveled from places as far away as the Gulf of Mexico, the Appalachians, and the Rocky Mountains to trade goods: copper, seashells, precious stones, pottery. Cahokia's plazas were enormous. One of them spanned 20 hectares, where 10,000 people could gather for festivals and ceremonies. And they loved parties. Archaeologists have found evidence of gigantic banquets, 2,000 deer carcasses in a single celebration. They drank a caffeinated beverage called yaupon, which came from hundreds of kilometers away. They played chunky, a game where participants threw spears at a moving stone disc. The crowd shouted and bet. The energy was electric. The houses were built with wooden posts and thatched roofs. About 15,000 people lived in simple houses, while the elite occupied the platforms of the mounds. But unlike many ancient cities, Cahokia did not have a permanent central market. Trade was not what united the city. It was religion. It was faith. People came from far and wide to participate in the ceremonies, and many stayed. The city grew because it was a spiritual center, not a commercial one. In 1054, a supernova lit up the sky for an entire month. The priests of Cahokia interpreted this as a divine sign. It was the beginning of a religious renaissance that brought thousands of pilgrims to the city. The city grew rapidly, absorbing immigrants from all over the region. But these immigrants brought their own languages, their own traditions, their own loyalties. Diversity was a strength and also a weakness. Not everything in Cahokia was a celebration. Tomb 72 is one of the most macabre finds in North American archaeology.
There, archaeologists found two bodies lying on a bed of 20,000 shell beads, forming the image of a falcon. One of them was the Birdman, probably a high-ranking ruler or priest. Around him, 250 other skeletons, many headless. 50 young women, around 21 years old, were sacrificed in a single ceremony. In another chamber, 40 bodies with signs of violence. There are no written records, there are no witnesses, but archaeologists believe that these sacrifices were part of fertility rituals or the founding of new temples. The elite of Cahokia demonstrated their power through death. Human sacrifices were the currency of spiritual power, and no one dared to question it. This system worked for centuries, but the city was built on a fragile foundation, and the collapse, when it came, was not quick. It was slow, gradual, and devastating. Around 1200, the Mississippi River began to behave strangely. The evidence is in the sediment of Horseshoe Lake, 5 kilometers from Cahokia. Layers of lake butter, fine sediments that only enter the lake during major floods, appear more frequently from the 13th century onwards. Archaeologists believe that a massive flood occurred around 1200, and more floods came after. Cahokia was built on the Mississippi floodplain. This was good for agriculture. The soils were rich, fertile, perfect for corn, but it was also a risk. When the river overflowed, the crops were destroyed, the houses were flooded, people were starving to death. But it wasn't just the water. The city had deforested the surrounding forests to obtain wood for construction and fuel. Without trees, rainwater ran off faster, carrying the soil away. The erosion was so severe that the water table rose, making the land more swampy and less productive. Corn production plummeted. Famine spread. And there was also the drought. Tree ring studies show that the region experienced a severe drought at the end of the 12th century, followed by others in the 13th century. The corn, which depended on regular rainfall, began to fail. The people who depended on corn to survive began to starve. In response, the authorities built a wooden palisade around the city center, a 3-kilometer-long wall with 15,000 logs, bastions for archers, fortified gates. They were afraid. Of whom? Of their neighbors, of their former allies, of the people who had immigrated to Cahokia and were now hungry and desperate. Between 1200 and 1350, the population of Cahokia dropped drastically, from 15,000 to less than 5,000, then to 2,000. People simply left. They left their homes, their pottery, their tools. They took nothing with them. They just left. Where did they go? East, south, west. To other regions of the Mississippi Valley.
To the hills of Illinois, where new communities began to emerge, to present-day Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, Oklahoma. They assimilated into other indigenous cultures, taking with them their stories, their games, their traditions. By 1400, Cahokia was empty. When French explorers arrived in the 17th century, they found only mounds covered in grass. They didn't know who had built them. They named Cahokia after the tribe that lived in the region at that time. For them, it was a mystery. For us, it is a monument to collapse.
But modern science has better answers. It wasn't a single factor, it was a combination. Deforestation, erosion, floods, droughts, famine, internal conflicts, loss of faith in the authorities. Each factor weakened the city. Together, they brought it down. Archaeologists Thomas Emerson and Kristen Hedman have an additional theory. Cahokia's ethnic and linguistic diversity may have been its greatest weakness. With so many immigrants from different backgrounds, internal conflict was inevitable. The city was a political experiment in unifying social and ethnic diversity that likely failed by design. Quote, Cahokia is not just a ruin, it is a warning. A civilization that built pyramids, that created one of the largest cities in the world, that developed a complex religion, that dominated trade and agriculture, and that, in the end, did not survive. Not because of an invader.
Not because of a war, but because of its own choices. They deforested the forests. They depended on a single crop. They built a city on a floodplain. And when the weather changed, when the river rose, when the land gave way, they had nowhere to go. They had no plan B. They had no resilience. What was left? Mounds of earth covered in grass, a state park in Illinois, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and a forgotten lesson. Because Americans have forgotten that they were once indigenous. Americans have forgotten that before New York, before Chicago, before San Francisco, there was Cahokia, a metropolis as large as any European city of the time, built by hands that had no iron tools, no draft animals, no writing. Just belief, just work, just community. Cahokia fell, but its story is not one of defeat. It is one of resilience. The people who lived there did not disappear. They moved. They adapted. They became the ancestors of many of the indigenous nations that still exist today. The Quapaw, the Osage, the Chickasaw, the Pawnee, the Cherokee, the Choctaw. The mounds are still there. The plazas are still there. The monk's tomb still stands. But the people are gone. And the question remains, what happens when an empire builds its civilization on a foundation it cannot sustain? The answer? It falls. And the survivors move on, as they always have, as they always will.